This series was over last test, but the narratives never end. And I was wondering, who came out of this series better or worse in terms of reputation? So I wanted to look at the stock report of each player from this series. If you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months, plus gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a blocker protects the stumps with NordVPN today. I didn't mean to start with someone so easy, but Jaiswal, obviously, he's not just up, he is way up. If you're trying to buy him now, he might be too expensive. You needed to buy him back in the West Indies days or when he was 10 in Mumbai. But his opening partner, Rohit, I think is probably more neutral. I don't think it was a bad series for Rohit, but if you go through some of the series and some of the batting he did when the wickets were absolutely ragging, this was just a normal batting performance. He did very, very well, but wasn't as exceptional. And by the end, his numbers look fine, but I don't think it was anywhere near Rohit at his best. I just don't think it really impacted on him at all. Shubman Gill, well, he'd have to be up. Although it is easier to be up when you were in the position that he was in, which was incredibly low. When it comes to Gill, I kind of thought a lot of people are eventually going to look very silly because there was no reason why he wasn't making test runs. There might not have been an obvious reason why he was going to start averaging 55, but to average under 30 with his talent, it just looked a little bit bizarre, and something was bound to regress over a certain point. And he did it by batting very good in the 3rd and 4th innings, which is clearly his strength. But by the end of the series, he was kind of batting good all the time. And we know how confident he was because he told Jimmy Anderson to retire. Oh, Patidar, this is an interesting one because there is absolutely no doubt that his reputation is down. But as there was a great article by KK, and we were going to do a feature on it as well, I'm not sure how many players had more bad luck at the start of their career than Patidar. But at a certain point, he wasn't making any runs. And then they decide to back him and bring him in for another test. And what happens? He gets hit and hurts his ankle and has to miss the game anyway. There's no doubt his stock is down, but this is probably also a good time to buy. I still think he's a really quality player. What about Shreyas Iyer? I mean, his stock is way down. He doesn't even have a contract anymore. There are random conspiracies about him on the internet. The BCCI seems to be putting the foot in. He won't play Ranji Trophy, and we don't even know why he was dropped because he was injured, then he wasn't injured. One way or another, he's no longer in the side, and there are now questions about him because the other players have batted so well around him. So his stock's down, but I'm not sure how much of that is bad batting or how much of that is just the rumour mill and the fact that other players came in and did better. Sarfaraz Khan's stock is quite definitely up. He did everything that we thought he would be able to do based on his first-class record, right? Not a particularly good runner between wickets. I'm not sure that his batting is going to translate in the same way that Jaiswal's is to overseas conditions, although who knows, but he looked like a master in these kinds of conditions, and almost every time he went out to bat, you thought he was going to make runs other than that golden duck. Devdutt Padikkal, well, he wasn't actually expecting to be playing. In fact, where would he have been even on the depth chart? He was so far down it. It's incredible that he ended up in this side at all, but he came in. He looked pretty good. He's got an interesting technique in Test cricket, the way that he plays so far back and everything. But he made runs. He also came in after a micro collapse when a couple of setback players had gone. There wasn't a lot of pressure on him, but he looked fine, right? It has to be up. KL Rahul, I'm going to go down. Not because he did anything particularly wrong in his one test. It's just that suddenly he seems to be fighting with many other players for a position. And if you look at his overall average, it might mean that with everyone else playing so well, he's not an automatic choice to come straight back into the team. He probably will, but he's going to need to make runs almost all the time because of all the younger players who are available. KS Bharat, well, he's probably gone, isn't he? Specialist wicketkeepers, they don't get many chances. If you don't make runs now and you're not averaging 30 to 35 and looking really confident when doing it, chances are the team will get rid of you. And also, part of the reason that KS Bharat is down is because Dhruv Jurel is way up. I've talked to people that are already thinking about how Dhruv Jurel might fit into the team, even when Rishabh Pant is fit. That's how good he currently looks. Of all the younger Indian players that made runs, he looked like the most technically sound at the moment. But on top of that, he looks really composed as well. He's not a brilliant wicketkeeper. I don't know what was going on. There was one ball to Ollie Pope where he just didn't move at all, despite the fact that the ball was quite clearly spinning. But he's not a terrible wicketkeeper either. He's tidy enough with the gloves, and he looks really, really competent with the bat. What about their bowlers? Well, Jasprit Bumrah has to be up. And that's kind of remarkable, right? Because it's Jasprit Bumrah and we all rate him very highly. But this did feel like another level that he had unlocked. Not that he's been better than at other stages, but because he was so good over a long series and he took a lot of wickets and for a period really held up the other Indian seamers and even the Indian spinners who weren't on his level. Mohammad Siraj has to be down. He went at 4 runs and over in this series, and when he used the new ball, it didn't look particularly good. When he used the old ball, I thought he was a lot better, but when it comes down to it, it wasn't a particularly good series for him. But I don't think it's the end of the world and he should never play for India or anything like that. He might still be their third best seamer, but England did feast on him quite a bit. What about Akashdeep? We didn't actually see that much of him, but it has to be up, right? There wasn't a lot of hype about him coming in. He was obviously a little bit further down the depth chart as well. Comes in and I thought bowled a really, really good spell. He bowled an okay secondary spell at another stage as well, but it was really up front where he was at his best. At the very least, he certainly bought himself other opportunities. Whereas Mukesh Kumar is down, I don't think that's completely fair, but I can see why this will be the case because Akashdeep has come on and looked a little bit better than him. I still think Mukesh Kumar is a fine bowler. I certainly wouldn't be throwing him away based on the performances in this series. However, you can't really deny that his reputation has taken a bit of a hit. I think Ashwin ended up neutral, and it's ridiculous, right? Because he started the series quite poor, and by the end of the series was absolutely fantastic. I see a lot of people talking about the fact that he used a new ball more at the end of the series. He's a pretty good bowler with the old ball as well. But it did look like the old Ashwin with the new ball, if that makes sense. But I've got him as neutral because we've seen him be this good before. The only reason his numbers don't look as good in this series is because it was better conditions for batting. And that's the same with Jadeja. I think he averaged around 40 with the bat and around 25 with the ball, which is neutral, which is a remarkable thing to say about a player. But we've seen him bat really, really well on much tougher wickets than this. And obviously, he's been a more constant threat. Having said that, for some of this time, he was injured as well. But yeah, certainly I wouldn't have him stock up, but he's definitely also not stock down. You can't say that for Akshar Patel, right? He has to be stock down. He's gone from being the third spinner automatically in Asian conditions to clearly not being that. He has been jumped in the order, and now he's probably more likely to be Jadeja's backup than anything else. It would have been interesting to see how he bowled throughout the entire series because the other spinners started slow and then worked the England players out. Akshar probably could have done the same thing, but he never really got a chance, so he is slightly stock down. Whereas Kuldeep is way stock up. I think people now want him to bat number 3. He's an all-rounder. He can do no wrong. He can play in Australia and all these sorts of things. But there is no doubt, I thought, not only did he bowl well, he bowled better as the series went on. And the fact that England couldn't pick his wrong and all the way through to the end was absolutely huge for me. I thought he also bowled more accurately towards the end of the series. He looked more confident, more comfortable, more on top of his game. I mean, his stock almost went up after every game at a certain point. And just a quick one on the captains. I think if you've been to this channel before, you'll know that I kind of think captaincy chat is a little bit nonsensical. But I would say that in this series, there was a certain point in which Rohit was certainly way down with his stocks. And by the time they won, no one's really mentioning that he didn't look like a particularly good captain at the end. So I think he would come out of it quite neutral. Whereas Stokes, probably slightly down. And I think with Stokes, as much as anything, it's the weird post-match comments that we've seen that have probably affected his reputation as much as anything else. I'm not sure he actually did captain worse, but I think it might be remembered as worse because they lost 4-1 and because of the many odd things that he did manage to say. But let's talk about his team. There is absolutely no doubt that Zach Crawley is up. I think Crawley might one day look back and really rue the fact that he didn't go on and make a big 100 and make this his breakout series. But he had a pretty good Ashes as well. But I thought this was better because I don't actually think he's a particularly good player of spin. And overall, I thought he handled that really well. He was assisted by the fact that India kept feeding him seam bowling up front. But even so, I thought he was better than I thought he was going to be by a big distance. And reputation-wise, I think certainly the same. And Ben Duckett, almost exactly the same. If you look at that entire partnership, it was huge for England. By the end, Duckett's average had come down a little bit. And that's really because Ashwin started taking the new ball. And that challenged Duckett in a way that I'm not sure he can actually overcome. But he still batted really well at different times. And he put pressure back on India. I mean, I've got Ollie Pope as down, which is absolutely bizarre because I don't think anyone thought Ollie Pope was going to come to India, almost score a double 100 and win a test match, not on his own, but, you know, kind of almost on his own at times. And maybe in the stock reports, I would only have him down slightly. But the point being that Ollie Pope, by the end of the series, people were actually starting to question his place and also perhaps even his future a little bit. He just does not start innings very well. And people were starting to go back and look at that original innings and have a look at the false shot percentage, which of course we talked about at the time. So remarkably, for a man who almost made a double 100 and won a test match, it probably is down. And Root is down as well. And I wondered if Root and Rohit had that much of a different kind of series. But I think the real difference is the Ashwin shot, which, to be fair, most people have forgotten. But also, the reverse scoop. And perhaps Root making runs right at the end when the series was dead and also England were out of the game doesn't matter as much, whereas Rohit was still making them when the game was live. It's also probably a little bit unfair on Root because if you look at it, he kind of bowled a lot of balls to begin the test series and then faced a lot of balls at the end when they actually didn't make him into a frontline bowler. Maybe this will end the conversation about him being an all-rounder because he didn't look like an all-rounder in this. He looked like a part-time bowler who occasionally bowls really good balls. So I'm going stock down, but mostly he just needs a lie down. Bairstow has to be down. In fact, way down, doesn't it? It's not a good series for him. I actually thought he seemed to be picking the ball up well in certain innings, but he was so frenetic and frantic. And, of all the players who are sort of most in on this sort of Bazball Kool-Aid of, you have to dominate and everything else, he's clearly been given a license. But sometimes I just thought that he was a lot better playing and thinking in an attacking way, but not trying to take down every single ball. But there were certain innings where I just felt like that's what he thought he had to do. But maybe he just thought there was always going to be a delivery with his name on it. Either way, Bairstow is down, which is a shame in his 100th test match. It will be really interesting to see what the next year of Johnny Bairstow's cricket is going to be. And Stokes as a batter has to be down. He's just not making a lot of runs when he travels away from home. His problems against spin kept coming up, and he got a couple of all-time world balls in this. But he does stand on the crease quite a bit, and I don't think he has a good technique in multiple ways to be able to handle spin in Asia. So I think it has to be a down for him. Ben Folkes, I'm going to go neutral, and I kind of think like it might be down, and I'm slightly higher on him myself personally, but I'm not sure here, because Ben Folkes did keep absolutely brilliantly, and he looked magnificent with the gloves. But in the end, he actually averaged less than Bairstow, and we're all sitting here saying what a bad series Bairstow had. But Folkes actually, I think, faced the third most balls of England in this series. That's the way he plays. He takes up a lot of time, but he doesn't put any pressure back. I think it's probably neutral from a sense that maybe if they go to Asia again, they might use him as a wicketkeeper. That is very, very possible. But outside of that, I think they're just going to look for a better batter to come in, especially in English conditions, whether that be Bairstow or one of the younger players that they've been looking at like Smith or Root. I don't know. But it's neutral for Folkes because I think he's more or less in that same sort of limbo that he was in before. And not to forget Dan Lawrence. And I put him on here for a reason. His stock is up, mostly in part because he didn't have a chance to fail. And I always feel with Lawrence that he's kind of always the guy just outside the side. I think from an England perspective, I would say his stock is down because if they didn't feel like they could bring him in at any stage, and maybe they wanted to give Bairstow more of a chance, and they didn't, and Pope had done that incredible innings, it would have been tough to drop him. But I do think at a certain point that they don't rate him all that high, but I do think from an England fan perspective, or from a general fan perspective, they'll be thinking, they had a guy they brought over who's supposed to be a specialist against spin, and he didn't play. Stock up. And onto their bowlers, I'm going to have Anderson as neutral. I think this is more or less what we expected from a 41-year-old Anderson. I thought he bowled well at times. I thought he was fine. No one really thought he was going to rip through. The ball didn't reverse as much as we had seen in previous times. Bumrah had a couple of good spells. Occasionally Anderson got the ball to move a little bit. But realistically, England's inability to get the ball to reverse for him was a bit of a problem. I thought there were times he tried to get into ego battles with the batters. And obviously, Jaiswal got him away a couple of times, but he got Gill. He's a 41-year-old seamer who still took wickets and gave them some control at times. I think that's probably a neutral, but at the same point, you have to think to yourself, why on earth would they ever bring him back to Asia again? I'm going to have Mark Wood as down. And the reason being is that he bowls very fast, but he didn't really put consistent pressure on any of the Indian players. He's not a particularly skillful bowler, and that's not a slight on him. He's supposed to be really, really fast. I think in Asia, you probably do need a little bit more skill or something else to fall on. I loved the way he tried and everything, but he didn't really take any wickets. And there were very few times when I thought he was the right option to come on and bowl. He just looked a little bit blah. It would be hard to see England having a lot of faith in him coming back to Asia based on this performance. Talking about people that are down, Ollie Robinson has to be way down. I don't even know really what to say about Ollie Robinson, other than the fact that I didn't think he was going to go very well in Asia. They brought him to Asia. He really struggled. And now the same questions that always asked about him have been asked again. Like, honest question, what is the future of Ollie Robertson? I've got him as way down here. Maybe it's just down. It just feels like, again, there's a tour overseas. And again, we start to think to ourselves, can Ollie Robertson actually bowl all the way through a test match? And if he could do it all the way through one test match away, will he be able to play two? What about the spinners though? Shoaib Bashir, way up. And of course he has to be way up. He was a penny stock before. You don't have a choice but him being up. But he did have a decent series considering everything. Remember, Bashir was picked because the pitches were going to rag sideways and you wanted sort of a slightly faster, taller bowler to bowl. Those weren't the pitches, right? And so the fact that he bowled okay all the way through, I think is a credit to him because this was not exactly what he was signed up to do. And I'll say the exact same thing of Tom Hartley. Neither of them are anywhere near accurate enough to be a consistent threat. But again, Tom Hartley was thrown in. I thought he was badly treated in the first innings by Ben Stokes, who, to be fair, pulled it back in the way that he handled him in the second innings. And by the end, Hartley had been worked out a little bit by the Indian players. But again, no one really expected all that much from Tom Hartley. So you would have to say that his stock is way up. This might be the highest stock that Tom Hartley ever has, or he might continue to develop and get that little bit more accurate, and who knows. I've gone neutral for Rehan Ahmed. I could have also gone a slight up. I wasn't sure where to put him overall, but I would say this. I thought he bowled fine, and I thought he was slightly more useful at times than I thought he was going to be. Having said that, left the series a little bit early and maybe didn't have a big impact in a way that would change his overall narrative or the way that we think about him. And the big question for Rehan Ahmed really is he a batter who bowls? Is he a bowler who bats? Where does he fit in the England batting order? Because he's probably not good enough to bat in the top 7 at the moment, which means he has to play as a frontline bowler, which means they need another frontline bowler in the side. That's kind of where I'm more at my neutral. I don't exactly know what his path is over the next year or so, other than the fact that England really like him, and I thought he bowled fine. He had some really good deliveries, struggled a little bit with his length, but he was not awful. And I think we've seen some young leg spinners thrown into India before and look absolutely terrible. That was not him. And then finally, Jack Leach. He only played one test. I almost want to have him as stock up, but the way that Hartley and Bashir actually held themselves, it's probably more a neutral for Leach. In fact, it's funny that the narrative didn't mention him as much throughout this series because it's a pretty big thing for England, right? Like if Ashwin couldn't play in this entire series, it would bother India, but they have players who can cover him. England don't have anyone who can cover Jack Leach. This was the tour. They needed him to be fit. And again, he wasn't. So maybe the neutral is the fact that he just can't stay fit for long enough. That's it. That's every player in this series. And I even threw in Dan Lawrence. You're welcome. But what about the narrative of this series? In which for the third, maybe even fourth now, time, Bazball died. Virat re-upped his daddy duty and umpire's call lived to fight another day. If you enjoyed this video, bloody well like it. Then subscribe and rub butter all over your body while telling everyone you know about this channel.